How's it going, everyone? Grim here with part 2 of my video on tips and tricks for how to build the Forge World Fire Raptor Gunship. So the first tip I want to share with you guys is make sure you dry fit all your pieces. This kind of goes without saying. A lot of people who already build models already know this, and if you're new to this hobby, you've probably already looked at some other YouTube videos on how to do it, and you've probably already heard the term dry fitting. Make sure you dry fit all the pieces before you actually glue anything to anything, okay? This is a kit, as you saw in part 1, that consists of both resin and plastic pieces. Plastic pieces, because of the process that Games Workshop and any company that makes these plastic sprues, because of the manufacturing process, these pieces can be very straight and very detailed and look great. Resin, on the other hand, from Forge World, can be pretty crooked. All right, those edges on those resin pieces are not always straight. So you're going to have to dry fit them to make sure they fit. And if you see gaps or you see bumps or anything that you know you can either cut off with a razor blade or sand off before you actually glue the two pieces together, best to do it then instead of gluing the two pieces together, realizing that it could have been joined better with a better fit and then trying to fix it afterwards, right? So, and also that being said though, keep in mind that no matter how much sanding, how much filing or cutting that you do, with resin, there's always going to be the possibility of gaps. This is in that little brochure that comes with every Forge World resin kit that says, hey, make sure you use hot water to straighten out some resin, bent resin pieces. Well, make sure you fill gaps with something like green stuff, right? There's bound to be gaps. That's just the reality of it. And there's multiple ways to fill these gaps, which we'll go over in a little while. Another tip, know your glue, all right? Because this is a plastic and resin kit, you're going to need both plastic cement for gluing plastic on plastic, and then you're going to need super glue or some kind of two-part epoxy for gluing the resin on resin and resin on plastic. All right. In this particular kit, I don't recommend the two-part epoxy. You can use it if you want to, but usually two-part epoxy is used when you have really big, heavy pieces of resin that you need to assemble, because that stuff is really strong. But for this particular kit, I think super glue and plastic cement is enough. Okay. Now, a trick for using the super glue: make sure you have an accelerator, a super glue accelerator, and I will go over that in a little while. You can see some of the tools for assembling this particular kit in front of you here. All right. None of these brands, first and foremost, are endorsed. I don't endorse any of these brands. I just use them. They're good, I use them, or they're cheap and I use them, but I'm not endorsing any of these, nor am I being sponsored by any of these brands to show you in this video. But I do want to go over some tools of the trade and what you not necessarily need, but what you may want to have available when putting together this kit. So I was talking about super glue, right? So super glue is a big one, right? Also called cyanoacrylate. It's all different kinds of brands, right? But they're basically the same thing. Cyanoacrylate adhesive. This stuff is really good, especially when you use it with some kind of accelerator like this Instaset, all right? This Instaset here, basically all it does is it causes a chemical reaction. You put the glue on, you put the two pieces together, and then you spray that accelerator onto the seal in between the two pieces, and it causes a chemical reaction with the super glue and sets that glue and hardens that glue right away, making it really quick to put those two pieces together. You don't have to wait for it to dry or anything like that. The other adhesive that you're mainly going to be using is plastic cement, right? So this is Tamiya extra thin cement. I like this one. It's extra thin in the sense that it really just goes on like water. They have a thicker brand or a thicker version that kind of goes a little bit more like in between a water and a gel. But you're going to need that for the plastic on plastic assembly. I also have here sprue goo. All right. For those of you who don't know what sprue goo is, you can't buy this. You have to make this at home. And what you're going to do is you're going to get all the pieces of sprue that you don't use, that you cut the actual pieces of the model out of, and you're left up with this frame of plastic. And you just cut all that up, you put it into a little bottle. All right, not a lot of it, maybe just enough pieces, and it's got to be small pieces to fill the bottom. And then you fill that bottle with plastic cement, enough to just barely cover the plastic that's in there. You leave it overnight, the plastic melts, because that's what this is. This is not so much a glue as it is a melter. It causes a chemical reaction with this particular plastic that melts it together and thereby fusing the two pieces. So it's going to melt the plastic that you put in the bottle, and it's going to turn it into this gooey substance. And if it's a little thick, then you add more plastic cement. If you notice that the sprue goo is really more running on the thin side, and it's just not really, it should be the consistency of not water, right? It should be thicker than water. It should be the consistency of a little bit thicker than blood, to be honest, because then you can kind of use it to drop it onto wherever you need to put it on. And basically, you add more plastic if you need to make it thicker. And what is this used for? This is used for two things. At least I use it for two things. I use it like plastic cement, because once you put sprue goo and you paint it on, and as you can see, this is in an old plastic cement bottle, and I have it there like that, right? It's almost like thicker than blood. It's almost like syrup, and you can paint it onto two pieces, and that will serve the same purpose as the plastic cement. It'll adhere those two pieces, fuse those two pieces together, but it'll also fill cracks in plastic. So if you have a crack, if you accidentally broke off a little piece of the edge of a plastic piece, and you're adhering it to another plastic piece, and that little broken edge is glaringly obvious, you could use sprue goo to kind of fill that crack and then sand it smooth afterwards. The third type of adhesive I talked about earlier is 2-part epoxy, right? This is a really good one. The brand is JB Weld, but like I said, I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying it's good, and you should only really use this for really heavy resin models that have these heavy pieces. This particular kit, the Fire Raptor Gunship, I don't think it's necessary. Okay. Another thing, I talked about this earlier, but we need razor blades, which I forgot to put in my little tray. Obviously, you're going to need a razor blade. You're going to need snips, right? You're going to need a file. Or sandpaper. You're going to need that punch, that trick I told you, right, on how to drill holes. Use that punch first to center it, and then you can use this little hand drill to drill it. What else you'll need, well, or want, I'm sure, I guarantee you're going to want this. You may not need it, but you're going to want this, is a nail file, okay? I don't necessarily use this nail file to sand down pieces. That's what this little hand file is for, but I use it for the little sharp edge, because sometimes you need to get into a little corner or a little edge where your finger, and if your nail is too short, it can't reach there, right? So that's what this is for, to kind of either smooth some sprue goo into place, or maybe gouge out something doesn't belong there and your fingers can't get to it. Like me, I got some stubby mitts right there, okay? All right. The second to the last thing I want to show you guys is this. I talked about this earlier. Baking soda. Baking soda is really good when mixed with super glue to turn into this wonderful, almost rock hard substance. And it's just basically turning this liquid into a solid with the baking soda. The last tool that you're going to need, and this one you're definitely going to need, is a level, okay? Because when you're putting some of these pieces on, You need to level them to make sure that they're perpendicular if they need to be perpendicular, or parallel if they need to be parallel. All right. Otherwise, if you're gluing them together and then you think they're straight, you think it's where it needs to be, and then you release your hand, you let go of the piece and you kind of look at it again, you realize actually that fin is a little crooked. So you're going to need a level to level these pieces as you're gluing them together. Okay, so this is what it looks like after you assemble the two resin sides and the two resin bottom parts of the fuselage. All right, so there's the two resin sides here, and then there's the forward bottom, and then the aft bottom, which is actually kind of has this ramp door, and it slopes up so that when you're looking in the side view of the aircraft, right, this is where the cockpit is going to be, the gun turrets, and then this is the rear with the door ramp, which I've glued into place because I don't need to open it up to look inside or anything like that. However, if you did look inside, you'll see, right, this is the ramp door, and then you'll see inside here. Now normally this is where the flight pylon goes into, and it doesn't go all the way through. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that there's this part here that's molded so that the pylon can go into there. The cross shape of the pylon can go into there, but it doesn't actually go all the way through. I cut it to go all the way through. I just drilled holes on the four rounded corners, right? And then just used a little saw or a little X-Acto knife to just kind of cut off the extra pieces and then sanded it down. I did that because I want the pylon. Normally the aircraft would just sit on top of the pylon, right? So here's the plastic pylon and it'll just sit. I wanted the pylon to go all the way through so that it comes out on the inside. That way there's less chance of the aircraft falling off of the pylon, because I don't want to glue the pylon onto the aircraft. I want to be able to remove the pylon, so then once again, right, compactability for transport. I wanted to just have this fuselage basically like that I can just have the wings detach, and then I want to be able to remove the flight stand, the pylon of the flight stand. So in order for that to be the case, I can't glue it obviously, but if I don't glue it, there isn't enough depth in this part for the pylon to sit, for the aircraft to sit nicely on the pylon. It would just fall off. So I cut all the way through so that the pylon can go all the way through. It'll be easier that way. Now in order to do that, however, there is this one wall that kind of sits right there, right? And so I needed to cut that wall to allow the pylon to go through, right? But here's the center wall there, and that's basically, yeah, the resin part of the main fuselage. So here's another video showing how the pylon goes into it all the way through inside the fuselage, and it just stops right at that wall that I kind of cut out, right? So you can see that, and this thing is not gonna fall off, right? So it's nice and solid, but because it's not glued, I can easily remove the flight stand pylon from the model when I'm transporting it. All right, one more tip here. So if you look carefully, as I put together the sides of the resin sides of the fuselage to the bottom of the fuselage, you'll notice that they have here, this is the front where the main Gatling guns go, but you'll notice, if you can see that there, there's a gap on either side. Okay, kind of see that gap there. All right, now when you're gluing the sides to the bottom of the fuselage, you might be tempted to try and make the side flush with the front here. Don't. That gap needs to be there. If you make it flush and you glue this side to the side of the fuselage to the front bottom of the fuselage piece, then this is going to be too close together. You're going to see that it's going to be too close together. And so tip, leave that gap. Just do the top plastic part as the shim to plumb the two sides as you're gluing them onto the bottom piece like I showed you earlier. So here's a little tip when you're assembling the resin components to the fuselage. Okay, you're going to take the forward underside, and then you're going to glue on one side of the fuselage, like let's say the left side here, right? And when you glue it, you're going to want to make it as right angle as possible. All right, use some accelerator for that super glue to harden, and then you're going to put the rear underside of the aircraft with the ramp slotted into place here, and you can see that it kind of slots in. There's a groove there on the side of the fuselage, on the inside of the fuselage where it slides in, and you're going to glue that and set that as well. Okay, then before you glue on the plastic top, this is not glued on yet, but before you glue on the plastic top, put the top on and then fit the side to the underside of the fuselage and to the top of the fuselage, and then glue it just to the underside, the resin underside of the fuselage. Do not glue it to the plastic top. But the reason why you want to put this plastic top here is it's kind of like a shim, and it holds the top part in place so that it seats properly, and you don't accidentally when you're gluing the sides to the underside, you don't accidentally glue them at a bad angle where the top part here, these two top parts, are now kind of close in and it's glued and it's set, and then you can't fit this top plastic part in. That's what you don't want to do. So use this top plastic part as a shim, have it in place as if it was glued, and then glue the second side in. So that's a good tip. All right, so now let's talk about the engine / wing components to the Fire Raptor. So as you can see here, it's both a resin and plastic component here that needs to be put together. And of course you're going to use super glue, right? Because it's two different materials. You can't use the plastic cement when you're joining plastic to resin, because that's just not going to work. However, when you use the super glue, in this case for the intake manifold and the exhaust connecting to the actual engine block here, or the turbine, I think you can use the super glue sparingly, and it's really straightforward. This only goes on one way, and this one, it can go on multiple ways, but you're not going to be wrong no matter how you put it on, because these little slats here all will slat fine no matter how you try and put it on. It's all uniform around and it'll be okay. Now this part here and this part here are two different pieces, and this plastic wing slides in between them. All right, so I would recommend, and the instructions have this, where you glue this to this first and then glue the whole thing onto the turbine, the engine turbine part. Okay, once again, real straightforward. Yeah, no problems here. This weapon and vertical thrust component is all one separate piece that you're going to have to glue onto the wing. Now, if you are not making your weapons interchangeable, then you're just going to glue these missiles or these rockets right into place following the instructions. And this part here, it sits in there, and then when you glue this part here onto the wing, make sure you don't put any glue where it turns on the two ends so that this thing can rotate. Okay, but if you are going to magnetize this to make the weapons interchangeable, you're not going to want to glue the rocket part, and the rocket part is just here. Ooh. Just this here. This is one piece. So normally you glue it in there, but you're not going to glue it. Instead, you're going to go to the backside, and the backside already had holes in it because these rocket heads are hollow. So there are already holes in there, and it's real easy to take 3mm magnets or 2mm magnets, because I think the holes themselves are about 2mm, and I just drilled them out to make 3mm because I have 3mm magnets, and they fit perfectly flush in there, no problem. This is really great. And then on the inside, if you can see it, there are magnets in there, right? Now, in order to put the magnets in there, because this whole thing is hollow, you're going to have to get a little bit of extra plastic sprue and glue it in there so that you can crazy glue the magnets to that plastic sprue part. So let me shine a light inside so you can better understand what I'm talking about. If you can see that there, ooh, a little too bright, right? You can see that's just some sprue that I just glued in there so that I have a place to glue the magnets. Really straightforward, really easy, but it makes it so now you can hot swap the weapons, right? So if you wanted to do las gun, which is an option, you know, las gun, or otherwise you go ahead and do the rockets. Okay. So you can see here, las gun, right? It's actually a twin las gun, but this kit only comes with 2 las guns, one for the left and one for the right. It's not really a twin las gun, but you know, you can just pretend that it is. But anyway, that's the wing part here. Now I want to talk to you guys about the ball turrets. So these are the components here to the ball turret, right? You got the guy in the middle there in his little gunner chair, and then you got these semi-spheres that go on each side. What I recommend you do, if you want to make the weapons hot swappable or interchangeable, because you can either do a quad heavy bolter or auto cannons on this thing, is you look for where you want to put the magnets. And so if you look carefully, you can see in between the 2 magnets that I'm now covering with my thumb, there's a little divot. And that divot coincides with a little dimple type thing. And that's how it's supposed to rest on it, like that, when you're gluing it. However, if you want to put a magnet, you can put a magnet instead. And so I did 2 magnets. You only need 1, but I did 2 magnets because I wanted to see if how does it look like this, and then how does it look when it's slightly higher. Either way, after you paint this, you won't be able to see the magnets anyway. But what you're going to do is, obviously, you're just going to follow the instructions. Oh, this is the wrong side. You're going to follow the instructions, right? You're going to glue this onto here. And you can see there's a groove there where it goes into. Glue this onto there. And at this point, you've already drilled out and glued on or glued in the little magnets here, right? And I'm using 3mm magnets. And then you're going to put this part on like that. The bottom slots in first, and then the top part rests onto it like that. So you can say it rests on like that. All right. Now I glued it all together like this as one piece because unfortunately I won't be able to see the gunner inside. But in my opinion, from a practical, tactical, realistic point of view, this wouldn't be open mid-flight, right? If you actually have the aircraft operational, why would this be open like that, where the gunner is now exposed to the elements? It makes sense that this is completely closed. So unfortunately, you won't be able to see the gunner, but I did it so that it's all glued and closed up with crazy glue. If you wanted to see the gunner, right, you want to paint, because it's really nice. Look, it's nicely detailed in there, right? Then obviously you don't have to put this door hatch part on. Just leave it off or whatever, and then just glue these sides on instead. Leave that exposed, and then you have a gunner there like that. But up to you. Now once you have all that as a nice ball, this part here is pretty straightforward, but make sure, here's a tip, make sure it's the right way, okay? Because look, you can put it either way, right? And this is what slots into the fuselage of the gunship, this little C-clip. And you got to make sure you put it in the right way, where the divot closest to the edge is on top, and the divot that's farther away from the edge is on the bottom. You can see that, right? Close one on top. Because what you're going to be doing then is you're going to be taking this little piece here and you're going to be gluing it onto there. And once that's glued in place, you can't remove the C-clip anymore. I guess you could really muscle it to remove the C-clip out by rotating it completely off. But the bottom line is that's what you're going to get. And it's going to look something like this, right? This is the ball turret, okay? And you're going to have this part here that can slide up and down because these holes correlate to these little pegs in the fuselage. And once you slide it in there, and you have the, you just imagine my fingers are the fuselage there. Once you slide it in there like that, then you'll be able to rotate this thing up and down as you see fit, right? You can rotate it up or you can rotate it down. And then of course you have the hot swappable guns that you can put these on if you want, right? Those are the auto guns. Okay, so something to keep in mind about the ball turret part. Make sure you don't accidentally glue this so that this doesn't move. I mean, you can intentionally glue it so it doesn't move as long as you have it positioned exactly how you want it. That's up to you. But I think the intent was for this thing to be able to move so the ball turret can move up and down like that. And obviously because it's on these two pegs, it can move this way as well. Okay, but yeah, so let's see. Yeah, that's good. Okay, one of the last things I want to talk to you about is this. So I would recommend the canopy not gluing it on and then painting it. Go ahead and prime the model first, in my opinion. Prime this separate, because then once this is primed, then you can glue the plastic on, or the plastic clear canopy part onto it, yeah? And then glue that onto the main fuselage. So that, in my opinion, is a good trick instead of gluing this on and then, if you glue this on here and then you glue it onto here and then you have to tape this clear part off when you're priming and painting it so that it doesn't get any paint on it. It's up to you. Okay. In this particular case, though, if you noticed, right, I don't have a pilot here. It does come with a pilot, and I'm not going to include the pilot for mine because actually, contrary to what I just told you, I'm not going to keep this clear. But I'm still going to prime this separately, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a really reflective mirror silver, so that it looks like when you're looking at it, it's just a beautiful mirror shine on it, and so it looks like it's kind of tinted silver. I think that will be pretty badass, and so you won't be able to see through it. So you won't be able to see the pilot. So why put the pilot in there? At least for this particular build. However, if you are going to put the pilot in there, then by all means do as I said about keeping this out separate and spraying the canopy and the aircraft separately and then gluing it on afterwards, after you've glued this into place when it's nice and clear. Okay? And here she is, the completed model, fully assembled. Obviously I haven't primed and painted it yet, but it is a wonderful kit, a lot easier than you might think. It might be a little daunting at first because it is both resin and plastic that you're going to have to use multiple adhering mediums to put this together, but it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And as you can see, it actually looks really nice. And once you paint this up, it's going to be a beautiful addition to your army on any tabletop. A couple of tips and tricks I wanted to share with you in closing. So tip number 1 is that if you look at this, the landing gear can be assembled in either the up or the down position, right? And maybe a lot of pictures you might see, like the picture that's on the Forge World website of this, has it where the landing gear is in the down position. I obviously assembled it where the landing gear is in the up position because this thing is always going to be flying. by the rules, it has to be on this base, so it's always going to be in the air. So why not have the landing gear always up? I don't ever see a time when this is going to be taken off the flight pylon except to put it away. A trick I want to share with you are these ball turrets. Okay, so I said this before, but you see that little hole there, and there's another hole on the other side. And this ball turret slides into there and locks into place. And this allows the holes allow the turret to turn. And then this C-clip allows the turret to turn up and down, right? Not very easily here, but once you have it locked in there, it's real easy to kind of turn up and down and then left and right. I recommend, as a trick, you don't put this in there until after you've painted the model completely, because once you get it locked in there, it is very, very difficult to get out. So don't even put it in there to begin with. Prime, paint, detail, make it all look good. You'll be able to prime the back of all of this and everything like that, right? Take the guns off, obviously, prime and plate, paint, prime and paint this separately, and then stick it in there after you're done with all the painting. Because once it locks into place, you're probably not going to be removing it. Okay, so I just kind of I didn't lock it completely into place. I just kind of put it in there a little bit and then kind of just let it rest there. It's not locked in place as it is right now. Once it actually locks in place, this whole ball turret will be much more recessed into the aircraft. All right, so do that. Final tip, the flying pylon. All right, if you can see this. Whoa. All right, you can see that the pylon is angled where it's kind of straight here and then kind of angled back there. All right. Now, if you do it so that the slope angle is on the front of the aircraft is going to look like it's pitching up. If you do it where the straighter part of the pylon is facing forward, the aircraft is going to look like it's pitching down. I chose to have it look like it's pitching down because it's a gunship, right? So it's kind of strafing the ground units. Although this does have air-to-air capability in terms of its data sheet, I wanted it to look down menacingly at the ground troops. So keep that in mind. When you do put that pylon on, making it one way or the other does change the pitch, either up or down of the aircraft. So this is the end of my two-part series on tips and tricks on how to build the Forge World Fire Raptor Gunship. Thank you so much for joining me and being a part of this. If you have any comments, please leave them. Tell me about something I may have said wrong, or maybe you have a better tip or trick that you can share with everybody. Leave a comment. Otherwise, please like and subscribe to my channel. And thank you very much. Grim out.